Is everybody in? Is everybody in? Is everybody in? The ceremony is about to begin. Let me tell you about heartache and the loss of God. Wandering in hopeless night. Out here in the perimeter there are no stars. Out here we is stone, immaculate. I was a 20th century poet by the name of Jim. My name's Rich, and many of you may know me as the co-founder and CEO of BestieBot, a leading home intelligence company. Some of you may know me from my time leading Lancaster AI, or from 2 decades of serving at the Tommy Foundation in the nonprofit and disabilities world. Some of you may know me from my books, including the Terror and Liberty series, and I promise the 2nd volume will be out this summer. Some of you only know me from my previous CPOS talks, where I have about an 80% solid prediction rate on AI I'm proud of. I've lived AI in the study of identity and consciousness, and yes, you sweet, dirty little hippies, expanding consciousness, for almost 3 decades. But today I speak for myself and only myself. I was told to give you a talk that you would remember, so for better or worse, I always deliver. So to that end, I'm going to offer you this welcome, an apology, a brief explanation, and then on to cover as much as possible about where we are with AI this first day of April of 2023. I will cover a lot of the sexy AI. There are literally tons of topics to talk about, and there's no way I could cover them in this short amount of time. So first, welcome to all of you who decided to come for this talk, and I appreciate your decision. I respect and admire both Joel and Jake and know you could have just as easily gone to their talks. So first, how many Gen Zers do we have in the audience today? Gen Z? Can you shout out a little bit? Because they can't hear you in the street. Yeah, all right. All right, so we got a couple Gen Zers here. So this may seem like a small tangent, but I promise you all these threads do weave together. I want to apologize to you, Gen Z. And I want to explain why you are going to be known as the AI generation. See, I'm from a generation known as the Zennials. We're a 4 to 5 year cohort between Gen X and the Millennials, and it's a pretty critical generation. We grew up with older siblings and cousins who were Gen X, born and raised in an analog world. But many of us were also the first generation in history to have a completely digital childhood. So we could handle technology just like all the millennials. So our first steps had all these digital interfaces like Ataris, Apple IIs, Commodore 64s, and so on. But at the same time, we still played outside all the time because none of those things were networked. So you could still find all of us where all the bikes were in the neighborhood. Okay? We were a transitional generation for history, the primary hinge between an analog and a digital world. But more importantly, we lived in the incredible 80s, where we were engaged in a war of ideas where we were the good guys, on the side of free speech, freedom from government, and the right of self-determination and dissent. And at the end of the Cold War, we won. They called it the end of history. 1 billion people freed from the chains of mental slavery. I mean, the good guys won. And so throughout the 90s, the boom of the internet and change was everywhere. Still, there are a few crazy conspiracists like me, of course, who love things like the X-Files, JFK, Waco, Ruby Ridge, and all those things, the Echelon Project we were watching, watching all those things. And then kind of 9/11 happened. And this will be a little controversial for some of you. I don't care anymore. But suddenly Bush and the neocons on the right kind of shredded half the Constitution. Data collection was everywhere. And the darkest fields of all the X-Files conspiracists like me came to life in a permanent tech-driven security state, mostly focused on the outside world. Some of us fell from Iraq, some of us didn't, but it really didn't matter at the end. And then later on, Obama and the neo-left came in and shredded the other half of the Constitution as they turned all those tech tools inwards on the American citizens with full cooperation of a public-private pact between Silicon Valley startups and the DC establishment. So why does this matter when discussing where AI is and open source? Why am I talking about this today? Well, the seminal work by a gentleman named Thomas Kuhn says in The Structure of Scientific Revolutions that science cannot be separated from social forces. We in the open source community helped build this AI movement, for better or for worse. So the computer vision models that we've made have done incredible things. Early detection for cancers. It's revolutionized healthcare. all kinds of things that have happened and gone on. Yet, P.J. Reddy, who designed the famous YOLO network, which many of you know, it's the most used computer vision network in the world, retired after releasing version 3 because his open source model was being used for mass surveillance. So he had good intentions by open sourcing his knowledge, but as we all know, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So for Generation Z, I simply want to say I'm sorry. My generation, as your eldest siblings on the beachheads of the new digital world, we failed to capitalize on the opportunities we grew up on. All I can promise is that some of us are aware of our failures, and we're doing everything we can to make things right before our time on the stage is over. And finally, a quick explanation of why I started with this image here. See, many of you may not know this, but this image is illegal in a third of the world. And the CCP will now not, which is the Chinese Communist Party, will not allow anything with this image to be seen in country. Even the date, June 4th, 1989, is heavily monitored. Microsoft got caught banning this image in the United States, too, by a glitch, of course. See, in May of 1989, students in Beijing started a protest against the corrupt Chinese Communist Party, and amid insane inflation, demanded political and economic reforms. They raised their own Statue of Liberty in Tiananmen Square, and the CCP sent in soldiers who joined the protest. And the people of Beijing prevented the state from coming in to crush the dissenters. So eventually the CCP had to bring in troops from another state, the Mongolians, to use their tanks and crush the protests. Well, that'll work out great. I talk too much. When dozens of these tanks rushed towards the protesters, an anonymous man had the courage, all alone, to stand in front of those machines where he was going to get run over and say, no, I don't think so. You're not going to go any further. And there were dozens of these tanks. Watch the pictures. Dozens. They were lined up for a half a mile around the square. And for a few brief moments, the future of world peace was held in the brave hand of a single, everyday person facing down this kind of machine. That man was grabbed and never seen again. Thousands, hundreds at least, maybe thousands of students were killed that day, and many more were imprisoned. And to this day in my life, this anonymous Chinese man is the single bravest person I have ever seen. And he inspired me to share with you today, with brutal honesty, what is happening and where we're really going with AI. To summarize, after 3 decades, like Elon, I'm pretty pessimistic at this point with preventing AI and ML from being abused as the tool of our demise in the free world. But, as a famous pirate once said, no cause is lost as long as there's one fool left to fight for it. So, let's begin. Let's look at these popular tools that everybody uses. So we use, all these are open source tools, right? So we got PyTorch, whoops, well, this isn't going well, there we go. PyTorch, TensorFlow, scikit-learn, OpenCV, ROS2, these are the big open source frameworks. You can go in for, these are just tools, and you can make anything you want. You can contribute back to them. There's tons of open languages that you can contribute to. Python, C and C++, one of my new favorites, Rust, which I'm really starting to dig. Heavy open source community to get involved. You have Lisp, that long-time Lisp that's never going to die with Fortran. You have, Julia and MATLAB, which are more scientific and ML-driven languages. But all these you can contribute and join and be a part of. Major platforms. Okay, well, these are some great ones. Hugging Face, Open AI, you may recognize, Tesla, Meta, Amazon, DeepMind, Microsoft, Apple, and NVIDIA. These are all the big players playing in this game. And if you actually spell that out and read it, it says, hot madman, which I thought was kind of cool. All right. ChatGPT and LLMs. Well, we're not going to discuss this too much because you've heard and seen a lot of examples in these talks. So let me just briefly cover a few things. Is ChatGPT AGI. No, it is not. It's simulacra. And I mentioned this in my 2019 CPOS talk when I briefly touched on Jean Baudrillard, the French philosopher, on simulacra and simulation, which many of you remember from The Matrix. Okay? So this is simulacra. They're convincing you that this is reality in a lot of ways. Will ChatGPT destroy the world? No, not by itself. However, you must 100% learn it. Just like you learned how to type, how to drive a car, or anything new. It will be foundational for life over the next 25 years. And if you don't learn it, and you're a coder, you're probably not going to have a job in 2 to 3 years. I'm just laying it out there for you. So just like, do I want to learn Git? No, nobody wants to learn Git. But you do because you're an engineer. You got to learn how to use ChatGPT. Now, the interesting thing here is also Europe and Italy just this past week already started banning some of ChatGPT and started fining them because the Europeans don't like corporations stealing from creative people and then selling it back to them at a profit. Something I kind of dig from Europe. It's something to watch as the training data sets continue to grow and where the regulations start to come in on certain tools like this. Okay. But let's take a look real quick at some of the ChatGPT. So the current tech, nobody's really dived into this, but there's a lot of being fed information in there, mostly text and corpus. But one of the unique things is that there's a deep reinforcement learning layer in there, which is a human feedback layer. You'll read through their documents. It's like they give a reward policy, right? It's like a reward policy. Wherever you see reward system, that says deep reinforcement learning. That says the system chooses this, makes this decision, it gets a reward, and then it continues to try to optimize that. It's how it's defeated all those great video games and everything, deep reinforcement learning, right? And so they use this in ChatGPT to make the networks better and try to get around some of the hallucinations and other weird effects that you have in ChatGPT. And also, they have coming multimodal training where you're going to be able to use images. If you watch the video for ChatGPT, you'll see that they actually did a quick, on a newspaper, or like a little napkin, they drew a little picture of a wireframe, fed it into ChatGPT, and it built a full website using HTML and JavaScript based on that one image. So that's pretty incredible. So that's called multimodal, and that's a lot of what's coming in the future here. So what do I mean? When we look at the future layered tech, I think we're going to get full multimodal. So we're talking text, image, audio, as well as smell and touch, potentially, and embodied agents. That's coming. We'll talk more about that. Memory-based visuals. So right now, your embeddings can keep track of about 32,000 different items, right? Well, using transformer-based memory, they may be able to do something like an LSTM, if you're familiar with those, which are able to keep track of things happening over a longer period of time, like a sequence of videos, and adding those into the networks. So more contextual understanding comes in. Now, this is something that, as an old head, I guess, neurosymbolic stuff, where symbolic reasoning is very important. And I think this will come into play in a lot of these networks to get over some of their biases that you may not know about yet. Right? They're going to put in symbolic networks, which was really big during the 80s and 90s when we just didn't have the computing power to do what deep learning does today. Now, so when ChatGPT plugins come in online here, and they can connect to the internet, which is going to happen, the plugins are coming out any day now, is this Judgment Day? Are they going to log in and launch the nukes? Well, not quite. So this talk isn't all doom and gloom, right? You can relax. We're a little bit away from this. But are Elon Musk, Steve Wozniak, Stephen Hawking, and others correct in signing that pledge to halt further development until the industry talks about it more? I think that's a good plan, in my personal opinion. And it's a good way to, kneecap a competitor as well at the same time. Well done, Elon. But I do think that it's something to pause because I don't think people are going to be ready for how fast we're transitioning. I literally had to change my talk 3 times since I started writing it based upon things that have happened with ChatGPT each week. The rate of change is incredible. So, it's worse than front-end development. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about what some of these tools are. So we have DALL-E 2. You heard about that earlier. We had Eleuther AI, which has stable diffusion. Unreal, or Midjourney, I should mention them too. They're huge. Unreal, which has the Meta Human Animation Studio, digital twinning. Unbelievable how fast you can get a digital twin together today. Unity, I've given talks on Unity, creating deep reinforcement learning models and synthetic data. Guess what? We can compete with the big folks now. Adobe Firefly, content creation on the fly for all the creatives. Jukebox, song generation. Synthesia, synthetic avatar videos. Resemble AI, voice cloning. I mean, goodness gracious. The generative image companies, though, in this sequence are facing billions of dollars of lawsuits right now using artists' work without compensation. Because remember, this is all taken off the internet. All of this is pulled. So it's what's known as that LAN 5B data set had a bunch of stock images, and Shutterstock got sued. And guess what? They had to settle with the artists. So are these other AI groups going to have to settle? What's that going to do to the industry? Are digital artists going to get crushed? I think so. A lot of them are, and that's just a sad fact. Just like in coding. A lot of you junior folks better become senior really fast. Is that fair? I'm not sure. That's what's going to happen. Okay, multimodal generative stills. So, for instance, if you can see in the upper left-hand corner, those N's that are there, somebody put input text in Adobe Firefly and said, give me a letter N made from green and red moss or from gold and intricate ornaments. And that's what it created. Pretty incredible. Then, of course, you have your Midjourney stuff there. I like Tom Hanks as a little doll. I thought that was kind of cute. And on the right there, you can see that's actually an image from my latest book where I put it into stable diffusion and said, I put in the term Statue of Liberty, reaching for the stars, Alpha Centauri, Milky Way galaxy. And it gave me this beautiful picture, which saved me $750 from having to hire a graphic book cover artist. So what do you think that's going to do, again, to artists? All right. So these are some videos that you end up pulling in. So some of you may have seen these. These are famous from Meta. So somebody put in, give me a flying dog with a red cape. And Meta created this. Or the image in the lower left-hand corner, it said, animate this. And look what we get out of that. It's pretty incredible. Then check this out.
Hey there, I'm Anna, and I'm an AI avatar. In this short video, I'll share with you the story of how I became an avatar and quickly explain the process of creating one.
Pretty convincing, right? It's pretty good. In fact, it's so crazy. My wife works in film. Many of you know her. And this is going to destroy the film industry in a lot of ways. It will democratize some things, but it's going to make some serious challenges. All I know is I'm excited for Spaceballs 2, The Search for More Money. I'm definitely going to make that with these tools. And a popular Romulan war ending to Star Trek Enterprise. They deserved a proper send-off. Okay. So at CPOS 2018, I warned you. So I sat here and warned all of you who'd never heard of this that generative AI is going to lead to insanity. Okay, well, what happened? Well, this is from a gentleman named Poso on Twitter. He's he's on the New Right, and he released this video of Biden talking about selective service. He called it a pre-creation, and he said that this is an example of what could come to pass. And people really freaked out on Twitter. Like, Twitter melted down in a lot of ways because of this. And if you think that it's just the neo-right using this, okay, well, how about this image from last week, where you have Trump surrounded by NYPD people, right? And the only thing that really, and Twitter melted down about this, too. There's a bunch of these images. So, the community notes actually came in handy for this and to understand this. But from my perspective, the way I look at it is you just have to use common sense when approaching this, right? So if the selective service was actually announced, it'd be all over the mainstream news. It wouldn't just be on Twitter, okay? People think Twitter is the world. Only 2% of America's on Twitter. Come on now. And the other thing, with Trump and the NYPD, do you think the Secret Service is going to let these people within a foot of Donald J. Trump? No. Come on, people. Use your brains. Okay. Here's an interesting one. Deepfake cheerleader. Mom got arrested for using deepfakes against one of her nasty little cheerleader friends of her daughter. Oops. But how about this? What's going to happen to artists? What's going to happen to films in 10 years, TV shows, the art of storytelling? I had a potential client who was a unicorn out of LA, and they're building an AI system that can detect the structure of a script. Like, is this a three-part act, three-act play, five-act play? Is this a hero's journey? And pull that out of a script, and then generate content based on that. What's going to happen to the heroes and heroines' journey? What's going to happen to plays, musicals, civil society? Okay? Some people are preparing for this. My buddy Bruce here, right? Did you know he signed over his image and his likeness and everything about him for in perpetuity so that people can put him in any film or commercial that can be sold for the rest of his life and far beyond for his generations after him? And that's what's going to happen. Are we going to need more actors? Or is every movie just going to, have every action movie going to have, Arnold and, Stallone and Bruce in it for the next, 100 years? I know that dates me a little bit. I'm sorry. All right. Let's move on to some other really cool areas. So AI for biology is making huge advances. I can't begin to get into all of this, but this is NVIDIA's BioNeMo service, which they just announced. AlphaFold 2, it's a deep learning model, you may have heard of it, that reduces time to determine a protein structure. It used to take years to figure out these things. They can hit it in minutes and seconds now. Minutes and seconds. Think about what that does for productivity. I love this one. DiffDoc is another model. It helps researchers understand how a drug molecule will bind with a target protein. So we're talking about new targeting for medicines. One of the things that I'm really excited about, I'm really hoping these kind of tools are going to make animal testing something from a horrible past. That's one of my things I'm really passionate about, and I really hope to experience that day. And I think AI can make that happen with these kind of tools. It is incredible what we're able to do. In fact, some of you older folks may remember this. Remember the human genome? In 2003, it cost $3 billion to sequence one genome, and it really wasn't done that well, right? Typical government, okay? But by 2023, 20 years later, we got it down to $100 to sequence that using these AI and ML tools. $100. That means that the age of personalized medicine is basically almost here. You'll be able to get medicine tailored to whatever condition you have. You'll be able to avoid side effects and other challenges that you have with medicine, and all thanks to AI and ML. Now, you also have these kind of problems. The AI suggested 40,000 new possible chemical weapons in just 6 hours using this. And we know that the government would never let anything get out of a lab, right? Okay. All right, come on. People know what I'm talking about. So, you got to be careful about this kind of stuff. All right? It's not things that can be used. These are just tools. They're amoral. They're tools. But we got to keep our eyes open for this kind of garbage that's going on. By the way, some of these that were made were more powerful than certain versions of anthrax, which are the most poisonous chemicals in the world. They just create a whole new category of them. Go us. All right, let's move over to space exploration, all right, where some amazing things are happening. So you have NASA, right, code-to-code.nasa.gov, so many open source libraries, so much cool stuff, and they have tons of cool data that you can access, so many awesome things. I can't even begin to talk about them. And you can use we're going to show you where some people who have been successful with it, but they've used these tools to find planets and create whole new parts of astrophysics, okay? And I threw Cube on here because I wanted to promote Cube, number one, because they're awesome. I know Joe and Nate, Nate and Nick, who did a great job, and Chelsea and Phil, and that whole team. I think they're doing fantastic work, and if you haven't had a chance to meet them, I hope you do. A lot of the stuff that's going into space is going into these autonomous rovers that you're going to end up having. Right, so Ingenuity, maybe you know the helicopter. It used its SLAM, simultaneous localization and mapping, that's a robotics term, using navigation, embedded Linux, and open source tools, right? And a lot of these open source tools were a lot of these open source models that we talked about earlier. So this helicopter was flown using open source tools on another planet. Then you have the Mars Curiosity, which used a lot of these same tools, including 3D tools like Blender and GIMP. Pretty neat. We're going to be building a lot of these rovers coming up for Titan, Europa, and some new ones for Mars, right? Using these AI and ML tools. So go check those out. Here's an interesting little story. I don't know if you can read that, but there's Ann Datillo. She was a senior at the University of Texas, Austin, found 2 planets by using an AI program to sift through a mountain of data collected by NASA's Kepler Space Telescope. By using these models, the 22-year-old helped usher in a new era in astronomical research. 22 discovering new planets using off-the-shelf open source tools and open AIs from NASA. That's pretty cool. Like, we're doing some neat stuff there. And this just came out because this was from the James Webb Telescope. Artificial intelligence finds first stars were formed in groups, which was really big news to people. People thought they formed independently, but in groups, whoa, this was big news, and they used ML tools based on that James Webb information. So there's a lot of good stuff going on there. Large data. Okay, this is some cool stuff. The ability to process large pieces of data is the foundations of machine learning in the current era. So Apache, it's an incredible foundation. It's been around forever. I applaud their open source work. The other 3, of course, are Microsoft, Google, and Amazon. Of course, since Amazon got those government cheese contracts, they're floating in money on this one. But they're massively parallel processing. Massive parallel processing is what it's about. Amazon Redshift, right, can process all those tables in parallel. It's incredible how fast information can be looked up and found today. So as far as the future, everything is just bigger and faster as far as this lookup table is going. This is great for things like fraud prevention. It creates trillions of dollars worth of jobs. And many startup dreams are found using these tools. But I want you to be wary of the shadow from this kind of stuff. You see, in China right now, you can jaywalk across the street. The government can scan your face, find you in a multi-billion row database, have you fined or otherwise punished by the time you make your way to the end of the block on the other side of the street. So imagine the database lookup tech behind that coupled with the multiple APIs you have. And that's existed for a few years now. Think about the good and the bad and the responsibility that comes with that. Now, that's almost here in the United States. It's going to have a different form. I'm not going to talk about it from stage, but I'm happy to discuss it later on with people who want to talk about it. Okay? All right, let's talk about something else, another industry. Self-driving cars. Everybody remembers those, right? So self-driving cars, there's no such thing yet, right, as a full self-driving stage 5 car, but we have what's known as stage 4 probably, which is fully autonomous in certain controlled conditions. Tesla and a couple of other groups have that. And, well, let's just say it's not going real well. Okay? Let's look at this. Waymo got a bunch of layoffs when Alphabet went through their recent layoffs. Ford and VW got rid of a bunch of their people in these. And oh, sweet Lord, Rivian lost 90% of its stock value in the last year. So, I'm here to declare self-driving cars are essentially dead at the moment. We're going through a winter for self-driving cars. And it's too bad they had to waste hundreds of billions of dollars to get there. As Elon said, we just didn't realize how hard it was. Okay, let's talk about robotics. Lots of stuff here. So Amica is using what's known as the Tritium ROS. Mesmer, it is a fixed location robot, and they're extremely expressive. Like, they are able to, if you look at these in videos, the facial expressions look almost like a human. I mean, I kid you not. It is ridiculous. It's better than anything the animatronics people have ever put together. And it can respond to certain things, but it just can't walk right now. Okay, but that's where a lot of people are going. And these companies that build things like Amica, there are people who build arms, right? They build these arms, and they are unbelievable how well artificial limbs are being created now. They're expensive still. We try to purchase a couple to be able to dev on, because that's fun. But they were pretty expensive. So you're still talking tens of thousands of dollars, maybe $100,000 for those artificial limbs. Now, Boston Dynamics, of course, has Spot the dog, which everybody knows, and the Atlas robot's out there kicking things and doing awesome stuff. Spot the dog you can get for about $75K. Atlas robot, it's unknown, but it's probably somewhere around $1 million. right now. But those are some great robotics-like stuff. KUKA, who here's worked with KUKA before? They're more low cost, yeah, one or two. Yeah, if you're looking for production or other things, KUKA machines are definitely a place to look into because they're easily programmed. They're generally inexpensive, 2 to 4K. If you order them from some wholesalers, you can get them pretty inexpensive and do some cool stuff. They revolutionized manufacturing, dozens of other industries. They're used in film, construction, foundry, transport. I mean, you find them everywhere. I've even seen them make music in an awesome music video once. I mean, it rocked. But anyway, what else? Oh, Optimus. Optimus. So everyone knows the Tesla Optimus. The second version just came out recently. It's Elon says it's going to be between 25 and 40K, right? So if you ever watched Bicentennial Man, the movie with Robin Williams a number of years ago, this will mostly be a middle class to upper middle class luxury for a while, right, until it filters out through society. And it's meant to replace everywhere where you find a minimum wage worker. So if you're at a fast food restaurant, you're gone. If you're in a lot of construction work or some other areas, you're probably going to be gone soon too. The working poor are going to get decimated by this. And so it is a serious thing we have to consider and think about. And, well, we'll figure out what happens there. So what's coming? So number one, with robots, you're going to get a totally new interrupt-driven system similar to ROS 2 and PubSub, but we're going to go back and, in my belief, use some analog parts. Remember those old things, those analog things? They can handle multivariable equations faster than digital in many situations. So I think we're going to be going back to that a lot. We're going to ask ourselves more, what if intelligence is an emergent phenomenon of simple processes repeated over and over? So this is what Jeff Hawkins described in his seminal work, 1,000 Brains, where evolution is potentially thousands of layers of your personality operating independently, and it just kind of builds on top of it. You're a Frankenstein of 1,000 different brains working together. We'll come back to this later on when we talk about xenobots. And lastly, something that I probably should mention from stage, but again, I don't care. Lastly is as far as humanoid robotics, something to think about for the future. One of the largest predictors of social instability, war, and violence in society is the number of unmarried and sexless single men between the ages of 18 to 35 in a geographical location. You see this today in the U.S. for various reasons, as well as China, right, from the one-child policy, Japan and Russia from an aging population, and the Middle East from lack of female birth control rights. And I encourage you to do more research on this. This is a legitimate thing. So does that mean that companion bots, I'll call them companion bots, like Joy from Blade Runner 2049 with a real body, could actually be an avenue for world peace? I don't know. I just hope somebody gives me $25 million so I can start testing that idea. All right? All right. Now, let's move on and talk about, oh, this is a fun one, AI-driven and autonomous weapons. So many of you know that we're involved in the first AI war. Okay? This is over in the Ukraine, and a lot of things are getting deployed or made. So right now, this is the B-21 unmanned bomber, currently being designed, completely unmanned, able to carry nukes. Yeah, that worries me a little bit because that's really Skynet kind of stuff. Now, it's not currently deployed yet, but it will be probably in 5 to 7 years. It might even be rushed before then. We'll see, depending on how bad things go. Now, we have Ukrainian and Western drones, right? So we all know about drones. A lot of us here race them. We do cool things with drones, right? And drones are very effective in combat for ground troops. It gives you immediate battlefield awareness. You'll see often units will carry them around. They'll launch them at the beginning of a firefight, or as they're doing a patrol, they'll have these drones and drone support. But here's a problem. Oh, kamikaze drones can kill anyone now. This is something that Elon brought up a couple of months ago in an interview. It's a problem with assassinations, right? Because a drone can go up to 200 miles an hour. What is a defense against an automatic drone honing in on somebody and wiping them out? That's a problem with social stability. Now, drones are also used for these kamikaze attacks. The Ukrainians used it to wipe out 2 facilities in Russia, energy facilities essentially, and they were going to send something to Moscow to try to hit something, which technically I think would be a war crime, but they got stopped before that happened. So it's interesting. Now, that's a little bit about drones. I won't go into it too much. But let's talk about the next one, which is the Russians have deployed their own as well. These are the Russian marker anti-mech infantry. So these combat modules can swivel 540 degrees in 1 second. And they have anti-tank missiles, grenade launchers, machine guns, and other weaponry. Now, according to the Russians, the robot operates independently, selecting a target according to a priority based on which of them is significant. That's AI target selection. Now, they say there's a human pulling the trigger. I don't know if you trust the Russians on that one, okay? But it's happening. It's already deployed. And of course, the Chinese, they get in on it too. So here's your little spot. Hey, let's put a 50 caliber machine gun on them, right? That's a little problem because of the recoil, right? The higher calibers have recoil issues with the Spot the Dog. But they do have weapons on them. And they carry them around with drones. They pick them up, and they carry them around for urban combat. So why are the Chinese thinking about urban combat? Well, probably because it has something to do with Taiwan, but hey, that's just me. Okay. So now, I'm going to say something here. I've been free kind of the left-right paradigm in America for a while. So I'm going to do my best to keep this down the middle for everybody here, okay? And I say that because this is a very controversial topic, and I'm going to keep it as plain as I can, okay? So let's talk about this, the foreign AI and data warfare, right? This is the AI age, and this is part of what it is to be in our world. So the Trump administration tried to ban TikTok and WeChat back a couple of years ago, right? Everybody remembers that. They got in a lot of trouble for that. And then they tried to move a lot of the chips because they didn't like what China was doing, tried to move those chips back here to America during the Trump administration. And then during COVID, you know, what happened was the Chinese bought up all of the health materials that we needed, I forget what they're called, PPEs or something like that, and before they announced COVID, and then when it launched, there was none available to the rest of the world to buy. And so the rest of the world was like, crap, maybe we shouldn't depend on one single nation to create all these things. Let's bring a lot of that industry back to our selective nations. And it happened all around the world, okay? Well, then what happened is Biden follows Trump with the tight curbs on the U.S. tech sales. They continue to leave that in place and a lot of those things in place. And here's where things got ratcheted up even more, was the U.S. ban on NVIDIA and AMD GPUs restricting the size, the nanometer sizes of these units, which is directly related to processing power. Let me get back to that, because I just want to tell you that we did pass the CHIPS Act recently, which we spent $52 billion to bring a lot of industry back to America and to build those plants here. It takes a long time to build those plants. So it'll be a few years, and there'll be a lot of graft and, corruption, if you will, pulling those dollars. But I think overall it was a good thing to get passed, and it'll be helpful. But when it comes to the banning of the chips, this reminds me, and I'm just old here maybe, it reminds me of World War II, when we cut off a lot of the Japanese from their oil supplies, which many people, many historians consider a direct reason that Pearl Harbor happened, right? It just didn't happen out of the blue. There were reasons why. So, are we antagonizing them? I don't know. But, oh boy, all right. Now I'm really going to get into it. I told you, you want to talk to remember. Here you go. Okay, so let's talk about, this is AI and machine learning, because this is important, right? Because this is about your data and how it's being used. And machine learning models are being used on your data. So the Twitter files and data access, there is a censorship industrial complex which uses advanced machine learning and models to determine criminality. It's known as pre-crime. Now, the Supreme Court, according to the Electronic Frontier Foundation, the Ninth Circuit, according to Electronic Frontier Foundation, recently came out and supported the government's position on this and that they didn't do anything wrong. But I want to remind you that they're the most overturned court in the U.S. for good reason. So this is going to the Supreme Court. And in my opinion, looking at this, it's not about justifying the content of the emails between the feds and placed in social media companies like Twitter. It's the fact that there shouldn't have been emails at all. Okay? And so I think that this is going to be a big thing that you're going to hear about a lot over time. And it's not a left versus right thing. Okay, this is a civil liberties thing, which should appeal to both sides. All right? And speaking of appealing to both sides, all right, so this was something where Bush, right, he had the warrantless wiretapping. Many of you remember that from after the Iraq invasion and all those things. Things went a little crazy for a little bit. Patriot Act and stuff. And then you had that was on the right. And then on the left, you ended up having, Biden getting in a lot of trouble right now with all the connections with all the social media companies. Not Biden himself, but, the administration. It's never just the president, right? And so that's what's happening with a lot of your information and how it's getting stored. Now, some of you remember this individual, right? Snowden, remember him? Okay. So he got the credit for talking about Echelon Project. Now, all those old conspiracy theorists, finally somebody listened. We hate being right. But essentially what happened, everyone knows that the NSA collects metadata. It's collecting all of your information. Everything's getting scooped up. And they are processing it with specific tools that we're building in the open source community, with some proprietary stuff thrown in as well. But just letting you know that that's what's happening. And essentially what he said was the security establishment after 9/11 essentially operates without any rules, and which I want to remind, all you supporters of Bernie and Trump, you know what that means, right? Both sides. So what does that mean here? So for vast surveillance, you may not know this, but after COVID, 500 contracts have already been signed for managing and scoring public data and building profiles of American citizens using ML and AI content. 500 in partnership with places like the DoD. So, the more I think about this, and the course of freedom since the time of JFK, and I know I sound like an old conspiracy nut, I don't care, the more depressed I get, actually. And I really wonder why I'm destined to kind of live in this kind of time period and yet be so powerless. And I know a lot of you feel the same way with a lot of these things, because we don't even think about it. We just abstract it away, just like they did during the time of the nukes. We still have thousands of nukes pointed at us every day and face complete annihilation, but we just abstract it away. We don't even think about it anymore, do you? That's how we survive. That's how people survive. We abstract horror away from our lives. And this is one of those things that we just do. And it reminds me of, something from Walt Whitman. O me, O life, the questions of these recurring, of the endless trains of the faithless, of the cities filled with the foolish. What good amid these, O me, O life? Answer, that you are here, that life exists in identity, that the powerful play goes on, and you might contribute a verse. I need to refer to Walt often when I think about this stuff. So, let's talk, though, about the future. I put that behind there to make it harder for the Chinese to steal this later. Okay. So, some future tech that it's affecting AI in order of arrival. Okay? Quantum computing. It's here. It's already happening. You can go check it out. Research language, go use Q#. It excels in optimization, things like the traveling salesperson problem, and cryptography. Excellent. Excellent work. Now, the problem is that the Chinese are kicking our butts in the actual application of it. Now, we have a lot of the tools, but they're kicking our butts in application. And that's a problem for cryptography. That's an NSA's problem, not my problem, right? So, but I'm just saying, but this tool is in use, and you can go use it. Go get some time if you want to run some optimization problems and check it out. Neuro-morphics, many of you know. I love neuro-morphics. I talk about them all the time. Research languages, C++, Python, they use the Lava framework. Super energy efficient, 25 times more energy efficient for the same that you would get in a lot of digital silicon for more von Neumann kind of stuff. Neural networks, sparse neural networks. Sparsity is the future for a lot of neural models. So look into that and understand more about how those work. The problem is that Intel doesn't mass produce them, so you have to get a part of their research program in order to join their stuff, okay? But you can join it. Go talk to them if you've got a cool idea. They're willing to work with you. It's mostly a European thing right now. Optical computing. This is new dev kits. Some of you may have seen these. Photonic arithmetic computing engine. Using optical lights to run computations is so energy efficient and fast. You're not relying on voltages in the same way anymore. Super energy efficiency. Now, we're probably still about 10 years away from this, getting into a good dev kit that I think everyone can use, but you can go check it out. Go look into it and see how it might work in some of your AI research if you want. Still early tech. And lastly, I know Court's moving his way down the aisle, so I'm running out of time here. As far as bioelectrics go, this is one of my pet projects these days. There's a gentleman by the name of Michael Levin out of Tufts University. I think he's going to win the Nobel Prize. He deserves to win the Nobel Prize for discovering these ideas of bioelectrics. It's a form of engineering using analog math, and that picture is of a xenobot. It's the first synthetic life form created by human beings. That, if we're God, that was our first creation, was that xenobot. It's actually a skin cell that he just harvested and threw in a Petri dish. And guess what? It started to learn. But skin cells aren't supposed to learn. They're supposed to stick to your body, right? But what it turns out, if you separate your cells from your body, they actually are more like live organisms operating independently versus a utility-driven organism, okay? And what that means for a lot of things is that, number one, knowledge and information isn't processed by your brain. You don't need neural connections to process information. This is catastrophic for a lot of our mind models. And I think we're going to have to go back to square one for a lot of this. And he's talking a lot about quantum brain effects with Carlton Friston. Many of you have heard me talk about Carlton Friston before. He's the most cited neuroscientist in the world at history. And he talks a lot about quantum brain effects. These two have worked together on that. Michael Levin has been able to detect cancer and stop cancer. He's basically found a potential cure for cancer, and not a small one. And he also works with these type of worms that live forever. They're immortal. Essentially, he trained one of these worms, right, to do these tasks, and then cut it up into 250 pieces. And each of those worms then, without having a brain, were able to continually operate in that sphere. They were able to remember everything without a brain. So some kind of knowledge is getting transferred that doesn't require neurons. It's electric fields. So ending cancer and immortality are pretty cool. He's funded by the Paul Allen AI Institute, which is why he's getting a lot of this work. So I would definitely check that out. It's getting a lot of low visibility right now, but with his work with Friston and others, I think you'll hear about him at the Nobel here in a little bit. So, in closing, because I know I'm out of time. Thank you, Cord. Let me close with this from Jim and just close with a quick addendum. So, this story has no moral. Trust not sleep or sorrow. The fife man croons the lull to wake and brings strong soldiers to a windy beach. So, AI can be a lot of fun. It's changing the world. Medicine, space, aging, it's a great time to be alive. And I firmly believe most people, they're pretty good people. The problem is it's the few number of devils that overwhelm us. So be paranoid about those devils moving forward. So I hope I've given you something to think about, and enjoy the rest of the week. All right?